I want to thank Donna and Kate and Harriet and anybody else that worked on the show. I think Heather wants to say thank you also. Yeah.
Yes, everybody, thank you so much. It's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you all for coming.
Absolutely, thank you all for coming.
So I moved to California in the early 80s, and I landed in this creative community in Sausalito and met Heather there. It was like around 1984 that we both became aware that we were artists. And then we both ended up at the San Francisco Art Institute together. But beyond that, the community we lived in, or Heather still lives there, I don't anymore, it was like a creative hotbed. It was really the ground of my art education, way beyond the San Francisco Art Institute ever was. I was always more interested in driving back to Sausalito than I was in going to school. So Heather and I have sailed together, we've debauched together, we've worked together in this community, which is a cooperative. And over the years since then, we've maintained contact as friends and painters, you know, calling each other up and saying, "Oh my God, nobody likes my work," or those kinds of artist issues, and support each other when one is feeling up and the other's feeling down over the years. And so we had a show in 1985 at the San Francisco Art Institute, which Donna posted an image of. And when Donna asked me in the last year, you know, do we want to have a show together, I thought it would be really fun to do it again. So here we are. I don't know, do you want to say anything?
Well, it was interesting. And please tell me if I don't speak loud enough, okay? Because I have a soft voice. Anyway, when Gail first asked me about doing a show, honestly, I went, I don't know. Well, let me think about that. And so I did for 5 minutes, and I went, okay. And I'm so thrilled to see our work together, because our process is so incredibly different. And I discovered this even more so by being with Gail at this time, because she told me her process the other day, and I'm like, wow. I mean, it's just, and she didn't know how my process was. So we both discovered even more things about each other as artists, which was really just added to the whole experience. And I wanted for you, all of you, to understand that Gail and I aren't just two artists having a show together, that we have history together. And that meant a lot to me and to her. So I really wanted to share that with you guys, so you get a bit of information on our background and how we basically grew up together, in a sense, and became mature painters. And so that's our story, really. So that's what I want to talk about that. And then if we want to talk about a little bit about our process. And so I'm going to give the floor to Gail, because her process is so interesting.
Okay, but before I do that, so I lived on a boat. Heather lives on a houseboat in this community still for 38 years. I don't live on a boat anymore, but I live next to the water. So you'll see that the edge where water meets land and the water meets the sky is a common theme in this particular show. Heather is a more figurative painter. I'm not a figurative painter at all. So I live near the water now. I live near a beach, and I live in Maine. And so it's a similar thing to Seattle. So it's kind of like I live in a place like Seattle. And so I just want to acknowledge that.
No, I understand. I agree. We both live on or near the water, so it influences our work. and it has been for a long, long time. I think you saw my show I had just before the pandemic broke out, and they were all boats, and that was, in a sense, it was sort of a departure from the work I had done before, and I sort of continued the way in that particular process. Anyway, so, and these paintings that I've done in this show became part of, it happened during the pandemic. They were all made during, except this one I did just before the pandemic happened. But the other ones are about the pandemic and how we're, crawling out into the light, trying to find the light, being in the dark world, trying to find the light. And that was sort of something that I kept thinking about in my isolation, which we all experience. It's interesting enough, we all understand what we're talking about because we've all been through it together. So I've made a body of work, and I'm continuing making a body of work, dealing with just isolation and being alone. And I sense in Gail's work also that sense of isolation as well, which I think, and looking at her work more and more and more, which it actually, I'm just so drawn to it. It really speaks of that to me, to my heart. So, and I still, so I'm going to give the floor back to her.
So I'm going to just talk about painting for a minute. So painting operates for me in many different ways. And Heather, we were kind of preparing for this talk the other day. And so I think Heather will say something a little bit different. Painting operates for me as a place. It's a place for me to go. It's a place for me to put my mind. It's a place for me to think, and it's a place for you or the viewer to enter into, to experience whatever it is you experience. Painting is also an object that conveys touch for me. It's kind of the in-between space of myself and you, a stranger who I don't know is looking at the work. And what I hope, and it might not be my work, but paintings in general, paintings transmit that energy from one person to the next, which is incredible considering that they are flat planes, right? Or a piece of wood, or a piece of cloth, or a piece of dirt that's a pigment, and hair that's a brush. So they transmit touch from one person to the next. And possibly create common ground. Also, they're objects that are archives of civilization. I don't keep this all in my head when I'm working, but they're a record of our life, our lives as humans, and they're a way for us, artists, culture makers, to communicate about the experience of being human. So I think about this a lot. I taught for a long time. I just retired. Now I'm full-time in the studio. The object that is a painting is a really potent thing. I don't know, do you want to say anything about that? Or I can keep going. I mean, maybe for you, so painting operates for you in a different way.
Totally.
Yeah, okay, go.
Well, first of all, I never think about what people are going to be seeing when I'm painting. I just think of the painting and me and that relationship that I have. And it has, the way I develop is, I really don't know what I'm going to do, first of all. And then I build a ground, and it comes up, and it develops itself. Painting, it sort of paints itself, in a sense. Although I have a hand in it, I let it sort of direct me. But I don't ever think about the outcome at all. I mean, because I want you, the audience, to make your own story up. If I told you they were da-da-da-da-da, I would take the mystery out. I think it gives the audience, for me anyway, your own imagination to make up your own world and your own story for each painting. So that's really important to me. And the figures came up this year. I hadn't really done figures before. And I work in series. So I have been working on a series called Home Alone, which I'm still working on. And I've done many house paintings. But I need to take a break from that and try some other kind of, I search for forms because a lot of my work, or most of it all, is about metaphors, about our world, our situation, global warming, the environment, politics, or my own situation, personal things. So it's through discovery, and it's random. It just becomes random. So the figures start happening, and I have this relationship with them. I ask them, who are you? Are you a male? Are you a female? Or what are you? What do you want to say? What are you doing? And I have to, by manipulating the paint in different ways, it finds itself. And sometimes it's a struggle, and sometimes it just appears. So each painting is its own experience. And I'm sure Gail has her story about what she discovers. So I'm giving you the floor again.
Okay. So my work isn't grounded in metaphor. It's more about, for me, how to convey a sensation or an optical experience. One of the functions of painting for me is the fact that I am seeing and you are seeing, that to make one aware that their eyes are activated. You know, so part of the optics happens in a repeated pattern, or repeated patterns next to, like, formally, the formal decisions, the repeated patterns, the way that color assimilates into space, and also, so it's about seeing, and it's also about making space on a two-dimensional surface in order to cause the experience of going in, and also that physical experience of going in may create a sensation for somebody. So it's not, and for me it's not about metaphor, it's pretty much one-to-one. I live near that bug lighthouse, that lighthouse is near my house. Sure, a lighthouse has a meaning, but it's not for me, it's about my own surroundings and just really painting what's around me. The other thing I will say is that on a formal level, so it's not technique, it's not about how to apply paint. On a formal level, making space on a two-dimensional surface is the game of the painter. So you take this flat thing, it's like throwing a rock in a very flat pond. You throw the rock and the pond makes a ripple. You take a flat white plane and you put a mark on it, and that mark creates a space. So where Heather finds her imagery, I find a space. So, and that comes from how I use color or how I use pattern. And as you might notice, my compositions are really a key element to making the work spatial. And some of the work has a pictorial kind of space. Well, ideally, both of these things happen. A pictorial kind of space where, you step on the dock and then you see the birds and then you see the lighthouses and you go back pictorially. But also it's flattened out so that there's an opticality that happens at the same time. So the viewer ideally looks a long time, or I can look at it for a long time because you hang a painting on a wall and it's a place to be with that object and to look at it.
Yeah, I have to say something that in some ways, oh God, I just lost the thought, I can't believe it. There is such a connection with memory. Like Gail looks at that lighthouse and she looks at the water and she looks at the tree. And she's got that all around, and then she goes back to her studio and she puts these compositions on each painting and paints them. But it's from memory, right? I mean, pretty much?
It's from observation, imagination,
Okay,
and,
right.
yeah, it can be memory
Okay,
too.
well, that's me as well. I mean, I live around a lot of, in like this neighborhood, there's lots of decay and ruin and old boats that are falling apart and ladders falling down, and I love that. So that memory, those memories, like this was from a boat at Gate 3. It's my sister, by the way, is here. And she used to live in the waterfront. Anyway, and this boat was it was up in the, up out of the water in a cradle, and it was just the bones of the boat, just the ribs. And it had been there forever and ever and ever. And the sun had bleached out all the wood, and it was so gorgeous. And the sun would come in and come through these pieces of wood that were just all shaped like this. And I would keep going back and back and back. And I did several paintings of this boat. So this is from that experience. So that was from a memory. Same kind of interesting way of absorbing your environment and bringing that back to the studio and making an image about that experience. So I find that there is, I mean, I just discovered that just now as you talk. So, and I just want to say too is that this whole few days here has been so amazing, because the conversations that we've had with Donna and Harriet and Gail and all these wonderful people have all been about art. It's like been this crash course in art history, in process, in artists I don't know, and artists I do know, and it's just been so rich and so, thank you. So, anyway, I don't know what else to say. Do you have anything else you want to say?
I could, well, let's just see what time it is.
We don't want to
We still have a little while, so.
Okay.
So I'll talk just a bit about time and politics. So time, space, and light are qualities that are held on the canvas. They're actually like physics, right? It's the same thing as with physics, only it's a different kind of recipe. So space and light, obviously. The time in the painting, for me, wants to be, in a way, I don't know if this sounds a little hokey, but like an eternal now. And like an eternal present, and also, I have to look at my thing here, like concrete time, but also ephemeral time. So, and again, I'll go back to how do you do that? Well, painters have a toolbox of formal things that they work with, color and the design of the composition, and etc. And so I work with that happily, because it's the game of painting, to create a sense of time and place. Scale and proportion are also altered a little bit, and perspective, to try to create that sense of time and space. So there's that. And then I'm going to talk about poetry a little bit, because I think, because Heather's more of an overtly political beast than I am, but I think poetry is a form of activism, and so in many ways I take that position. I turn my back and go into a world that, is maybe more a place of reflection and contemplation and poetry. And not so overtly about politics. And I'm going to have to say about all the events of the world right now, I sometimes am not sure that's the right thing to do, but I also at the same time feel it's the only thing to do. So I don't know if you want to say anything about politics, maybe not so present in this particular work.
Yeah, in my earlier work, I did a lot of cartoon imagery using political issues as the content in it. And then at a certain point, I decided I had painted myself in a corner, and I needed to change, and I needed to evoke more feeling. Even though I had feeling in that work, but I wanted to do it with paint rather than drawing, figures, just things like that. But the politics, I mean, these paintings are also about global warming, which I care about, which we all care about. So I see the water rising, I see destruction, I see fires. I mean, so I go back and forth from fire to water in my paintings. Not in this particular body of work, but in the work I have more recently. Although I did show a painting here a few years ago that is a boat that I had just painted right after all the fires in Australia. And that was terrible, so that boat was about that. But yeah, I think I see more poetry in Gail's work in a more lyrical sense, which I think has a delicacy there that I think is lovely and beautiful, and I personally want to go there. Okay, I don't necessarily see that in my work. I'm just saying that. There's no comparison. It's just different. But that's what makes it so wonderful. Is it is different. I say things this way. She says things that way.
She gets dirty in the studio. I stay clean. I mean, we both express emotion differently. We're both really emotional people, and we both express emotion differently. And you know, I have so much admiration. Like, I want to be a gushy material painter. I really do, but it's just not. And actually, underneath the beginnings of all these paintings have physicality to it, and then it gets covered up, right? Which, you know, so. And you know, we talked a little bit about, Heather works on one painting at a time. I work on 10. So she stays focused on one, and I build them all up simultaneously, and then eventually focus on one at a time. So there's a lot of difference. I mean, the abstraction in her work, for me, is very upfront.
Yeah.
You know, and maybe for some of you, the representation is more upfront. I mean, I see a lot of abstraction in my own work, but it's not necessarily maybe what you see.
Yeah. I think if I look at your work, like, the other day I was going around photographing it and just kind of going into the details. So if you go into the details of Gail's work, like, look at her birds. Her birds are so beautiful and beautifully painted and very abstract, just the way she uses the paint in there. So there's areas, as a whole, it makes this picture that's more lyrical and not abstract at all. But if you go into the paint itself, it's like looking at Chuck Close painting and his big paintings of his portraits were all little squares that were all like painted, you know, very meticulously. But as you get back to it, it was his head, right? And that's kind of, in a sense, how Gail's paintings are. You have to, you go really in, and then you back out, and you get this amazing painting. Anyway.
And you know, all paintings are abstractions.
Yes, I have a question for you.
Okay.
So I was thinking about what you said when you are working about 10 different pieces. And do you feel sometimes when you walk into the studio that you have something to say, so that in some ways it's sort of a collective message? You work here and you've got something to say here, and then you go over here and you have something to say there, and somehow the pieces are sort of one in that respect. That, not that they're all obviously different, but that there is some kind of collective consciousness or something as you're working on these. You know, you come in, I'm working on this, and then you're back here, and then you do that.
It is a conversation.
That's what I thought.
It's definitely a conversation, and so what's happening now in my studio is I sent all these to Donna, and there's nothing in my, they're all white canvases now, and so the icon that I'm taking with me, I usually take an icon with me, or I also, I do a lot of interiors that are inspired by an island place that I stay at in Casco Bay. And this body of work is totally outside. With this body of work, I want it to be completely outside. So I'm taking this, I take the icon with me, and I also think about, do I want to be inside or do I want to be outside, or a little bit of both? And then I start and I build all the paintings at once, and I'll turn my head and I'll look and I'll go, oh, there's red there. I need red here. Or this painting, I also move them all around so that they're next to each other, so that they can speak to each other too. Because it is a dialogue. It's a really, I mean, I know that it tells you. I mean, when you force yourself on it too much, it doesn't work. And I do plenty of paintings like that. So it's like, out of a body of work, maybe 4 will be fresh without that, right? So you try to kind of keep a light touch on it. It doesn't always go like that. So why I have that many is so that I don't squeeze them all to death. You know, you probably, I can't believe that you can keep them that fresh and not kill them, because I do.
Oh, I killed many.
Oh, she's good.
I know.
Oh my God, many. No. It's, yeah.
Are there other questions? I'd love to have other questions. Yeah.
I've been struck by the 2 paintings on the wall behind you about your use of perspective, because when you first walk in and you look at them as you're walking by, they look pretty normal, but sitting back here, you notice that the dock in both of these, the piece of the dock is very different perspectively from the rest of the painting. So I'm curious about that.
Yeah, well, you know, Walt Disney was a big influence, like Fantasia was kind of an influence on me. So that sort of flattened, even though there was volume in those cartoons, I saw them flat, and I can see the world flat. You know, I can alter my vision, and so it's about how I see, really, and it's also about acknowledging the picture plane. It's a nod to the picture plane, like you're looking at a flat thing. Thanks for asking that.
I have a question for Heather. So you talked about visual metaphors. The letter forms in some of these paintings, do they have a specific metaphor you want to share?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I painted these during the pandemic, and somehow a ladder image came into my mind, and I thought about that because I thought of how we're all trying to come out of this into the light, and so you can see that underneath it's almost water, but it's darker, and as you climb it gets lighter and the light is above. So that's sort of the metaphor there is, you know, for me anyway, is coming out of the dark into the light, into the hope for a better world. Maybe it's too cliche-ish, I don't know.
So I made a second part of the question. Visually, I immediately made a connection to Wilcoxon's work. Is he a painter on your mind, in the back of your mind?
Could you repeat that? I can't.
I said when I see the letter from the painting, the sort of the sensation it evokes in me, I made the immediate association with Philip Guston's work.
Oh, Philip Guston.
So I wonder if he's a painter you like, you
Oh,
hate,
yes.
on your mind, or
That's a compliment. I love Philip Guston. He's my most, we brought all these books up from Donna's collection that refer to artists that we love, and he's the top of my list. Are you kidding? Oh my God.
He's on the top of everybody's list. I mean, I don't know, maybe, you know.
He is pretty amazing, pretty amazing. Thank you, that's a good.
Well, you know, somebody said, I can't remember who I was listening to, but they had been told, just paint whatever you want. You know, Philip Guston certainly did that.
Yeah.
And that is the hardest thing to do.
But he had to learn to do that. I have read a lot of, there's a great book called The Night Studio, and his daughter wrote it. And I've read it 2 times, but it talks about his process and how he was so, you know, he worked for the WPA, and he did all these paintings that were very formal and wonderful figuratives. He even did the KKK guys then, and then switched into more abstract expressionism, and he moved on. Anyway, I know that you have a question.
Oh, I do. I have a question for both of you. I'll ask Gail first, since Heather just went. So,
Smells so nice.
So, you mentioned, you know, Spain being a place for touch, space, opticality, optical experience. And I was curious, 2 things. One is, do the structure you work on, you start maybe a bunch at a time, do you find the structure of your work with sketches or any preliminary ideas about structure? I mean, they're very structured and in a clarity of structure, like the main shapes. So that's one question. Or do you find it as you go, or do you kind of, your drawings or kind of guide you into the bones of the structure? And then number 2 is there any aspect of the physicality of actually painting with paint that you experience as an important part of the painting? Or is it more in service of the other elements that you mentioned?
Wow, that's a really good question. Well, let me answer the first one. So, I sometimes think like I'm a geometric abstractionist. And so I start directly on the canvas. And in fact, I don't feel like I draw that well. I don't draw much. So I work directly on the canvas. I create the geometry, and then I'll photograph it, and now, like in the last 5 years, I'll do it in the iPad. I'll photograph it, and I'll take the photograph, and I'll work up a bunch of different ideas in the iPad. Then I'll try them out. Oftentimes, some of these paintings are painted over and over and over again, like they're not right. So I draw on the iPad, but I don't draw, per se. The question about paint as, how did you put it in service of the...
Well, you didn't, when you were mentioning the elements that you think are important in painting, I recognized that one thing that you didn't mention, among other great things that you mentioned, was just the idea, you did say touch.
Right.
But the conveyance of touch, it's like, but you weren't talking so much about the physicality of your process,
right.
like as being like a crucial part of your experience.
Okay, so for me, painting is an ordinary act. It's almost domestic. It's a domestic act, like sewing. I embroidered when I was in high school. So in many ways, these are like embroideries for me. But you bet I'm going to go home and think about your question. Because, you know, certainly in Heather's work, the materiality, the gushy paint is present. And so, and you know, I almost feel like ashamed that I use acrylic paint, because if you're talking to real painters, they're like, oh no, you know, don't use acrylic paint. But for me, the action, that material is almost like thread, really. It behaves like thread. And I understand, I've done watercolor, I've done oil paint, I've used acrylic paint, I've used a whole variety. You know, I'm very versed in the material, but I guess it's not that front and center for me, which is really an interesting thing for me to think about. No, I know.
Yeah.
Well, and that touch, that sort of sewing touch.
Yeah, that thing. maybe that's more of a
touching, I touch it,
meditative
yes it
kind
is,
of
and
experience that you're having personally.
that I hope is conveyed. I mean, I touch these things a lot.
Yeah, that's part of it. Is that part of the thing that really energizes you or that you need, you're craving? Is it part of why you do it? Is it part of...
I like to know my process. Like I like stripping furniture and varnishing. Right? I like that process. There's something like because it's really hard to make a painting. And like how she does it, it's like I couldn't do that. So when I get to the part where I'm like doing this, I'm really happy. And I think it's a lot about domestic time. It's related to domestic time and home and an ordinary action. You know, some people really like repetitive activity and some people don't. I'm one of those people, you know. Maybe it's a little obsessive compulsive.
It pays off.
Yeah.
Can I ask your microphone? So, Heather, my question for you is, I'm very interested in your palette and the color world that you present, and I'm curious if, you know, if painting is a metaphor, or for you, what is the tone, or how do you think about color? How do you choose to, I mean, I love your palette, but it's very specific. How do you think about color?
That's a good question, because I think about the color. First, I put whatever I have left on a canvas. I like to build up of the circle. But then I think about the color a lot. And I think about how I'm going to use the color, whether it's going to be one color all the way down, or darker on the bottom coming back up. Or a lot of times, like I have one wall that I paint on, and then I have another wall where I've got other paintings that are I think are finished but are sitting there. Those paintings will tell me what I'm going to do as far as color. Like I did a series during the pandemic with all these masks paintings. They're about this big, and every one of them had a different colored background. So I would do one, and it was just a head with a mask. But the color was so important because I wanted them to work together. I wanted that color and that color to work together. So that would dictate to me what I would do in the next painting. The same with these. These are very, especially that one and that one. These three here. This one I painted earlier, but these three paintings here, I painted roughly around the same time. And I use a lot of Payne's gray, you can see. I don't do a lot of mixing of color. I'll mix maybe 2 or 3 colors together, and I use this tool called a bowl scraper, and it's shaped like this, okay? And I mix my paint up, and a lot of times I'll put it on there, and then I'll put it on with the bowl scraper. And which really gives it a wonderful, lush surface. Now, the actual images of the ladders themselves, I draw that. Those are drawn in with oil sticks. And I love to draw. So that's how, and it has to be wet. So it picks up what's underneath or by itself, you know. So I work really quickly, and I work wet on wet. And then I see how that is. Then it's like, okay, and I'll either stop, I think it's okay, and I go, oh my God, okay, stop, or it's horrible, I wipe the whole thing out, or the color's not working, I wipe it all out, or I think it's really great one day, and the next day I walk in, and I go, oh, that's horrible, I wipe the whole thing out again. I mean, the woman over there, I worked on her quite a few times, but I discovered a way of putting paint on, letting it run, and then taking my bowl scraper and actually scraping it down. So then it picks up whatever is left underneath, which I love now. I like doing that more and more and more. Because it's such a mystery. Okay? And a lot of my paintings, not here, unfortunately, maybe that one down there, it's funny, that painting, the ladder painting on it, that was here before. That had another painting in there. It was blue, it was a blue boat.
That was beautiful.
And it was beautiful. So I brought it, she shipped it back to me, and I just had my cataracts removed. And when you get the cataracts removed, everything's like, well, blues really became distinct in my work, blues. And it was like, oh, that's too blue, it's too blue. So I ended up painting over that painting, so now you have it back. You can have it x-rayed and see what's underneath. Under there. But a lot of, but that's the only one really that I have here that I've painted over several times. But my big canvases, which I've never really been able to ship here, maybe someday, but they're really big. Those paintings have many paintings underneath. And what do? You know, I want to paint, I'm going to paint. And if you're not that great, bye. I'm just going to paint over you. So it's just how I work. And but part of it too is I find that when I paint over old paintings, I've created this history, and it's there. And I love the knots and the discrepancies that happen over that paint. And it's not flattering, it's kind of bumpy and lumpy and messy, and I love that. I love that. So anyway, there you know, now you know about that one.
I think if there's no last minute questions, I think we can wrap it up, and then we're gonna bring down a little bit of wine and bubbly water, and we can talk chit chat amongst yourselves. Is that
Good. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.